As those curious enough to bother investigating will know, I'm pro-natural health on a civil liberty basis, pro-ethical business, even pretending is a step forward, pro-social capital on a neo-socialist basis, pro-nationalism on an anti-USA dominated globalism basis, pro-diversity on the basis of leaving people alone unless they attempt to interfere with your life, pro-action on climate change. This ought to be obvious unless you are demented. Unlike most people, my confinement at home due to my caring responsibilities means that I have some limited time to actually find out before making decisions on such things. My vision for the future is of individuals investing in developing nations from their own pockets. Setting up a rural business in Africa obviously requires significantly scaled down investment on setting up a business in central London, which is apparently how our delusional spoilt brat government in the UK thinks. A chance conversation with a nice chap from Yorkshire on Twitter today alerted me to the fact that most people do not realise why they are under threat of being fracked. It is part of the war effort and strategy for the period after conflict when Saudi, the USA, and to a more limited extent European countries, including the UK, will divide the spoils in terms of contracts issued to rebuild countries such as Syria and Libya. To achieve this, puppet regimes will be put in place in much the same way they've been put in place in the Ukraine, Iraq, and Libya. Oil prices are artificially low at the moment. There is no actual glut. Sensible countries should be withholding their reserves for the future, but the few individuals that benefit from defence spending, loans taken out by people maintaining appearances, inflicting poverty, which affects the rest of us by causing a proportion of the population to take up a life of crime eventually, on the lowest income brackets and new immigrants alike, are making sure that no reserves are held. This is to ensure that the nation funds the biggest economic heist in history. As I have explained in several previous posts, your only chance is to redirect your money. I have already suggested that you move your money to ethical banks who do not invest in fossil fuels, defence producers, GMO and chemicals. I have suggested that you avoid chain supermarkets. I have suggested that you feed the smaller companies to encourage competition in the fields of media, finance, food, chemicals and health. Today's conversation indicated that most people do not have sufficient knowledge or interest to investigate reducing their reliance on fossil fuels. As this is rather central to our current political situation, I shall now endeavour to explain the very real conspiracy you enable when you vote either Tory or New Labour. Both end up with the same global result in slightly different ways. When I was still interviewing, it became apparent over several years that gas prices continuously went up. When I investigated why, it was said that Russia was the main supplier to Europe, with some supplies coming from the Middle East. We all know how hysterical the USA are about Russia. They seem very fond of Saudi, however. My Hindu friends hypothesise that Saudi has bought some favours, meaning that we are taught endless tolerance even as people fall victim to attacks, which probably would not happen if we were not incessantly helping the USA with their encirclement policy against Putin. Now we are also being asked to tolerate armed American guards in our airports. Fracking is supposed to be accepted without question. If pushed, they will probably tell you it's part of the war effort, since Canadian and American fracking is lowering the price of gas. In the UK, the Tories are keen to exploit our rather fragile country in order to produce even more. This is not to benefit the consumer at all, since once America installs a puppet state in the countries we're currently destroying, the preferred fossil fuel suppliers will move into those countries, making fracking the UK a luxury that will no longer be necessary. Granting permission to do it, however, means that the same people who benefit from war benefit from fracking your country when the war is over during the rebuilding process. Therefore, relying on gas is effectively supporting endless austerity and perpetual war. For this reason, 5 years ago, I installed an air-to-water heat pump and system in the family pile. This has saved us 66% on our huge fuel bills and means that a 14-room house costs slightly less to heat with our constant hot water than my friend's 2-bedroom flat costs to heat with gas. The system paid for itself 2 years ago in terms of outlay, and we are not supporting the corrupt and outdated fossil fuel business. I am not quite brave enough to switch to an electric car yet, but I will be doing this also when I am satisfied that I will still be able to drive all over Scotland without mishap. Not for the first time, this story has been divided into parts to make sure you are confused and to make sure you can only be bothered about one bit at a time. Anti-frackers, anti-science, in much the same way they have waged war on the alternative health problem. This is in anticipation of TTIP, TIPP and TISA. Europe and the ASEAN countries are expected to play along with American corporate dominance, bought with borrowed American cash from China, who are laughing their heads off. Likewise, it is relatively simple in America to present the argument as anti-war, anti-Jesus. We in Europe are not so simple, so instead we get some nice frictional immigration to foster a shift to the political right. Your nervousness about immigration is likely to confuse you into supporting the welfare budget being spent on bombs from the Cameron friends and family. The media has helped by doing a marvellous job in persuading you that poor people really do deserve to starve, so it's fine that thousands of disabled people die because of the policies of the poorly educated Ian Duncan Smith. Add to this the cheeky jocks wanting to take your fossil fuel supply away in the UK, and we have a perfect storm of confusion. The consequences of you falling for this, staying in a state of ignorance, believing that as long as you're in the home counties or London, paying your way in your relatively safe job, getting the rest of the UK to fund as many bridges and roads as Boris could wish for, is that your country is being set up to be sold to the USA, hook, line and sinker, with the proceeds going to a very few already rich people. Voting Labour in its former form simply meant the proceeds would go to alternative, already rich people. Under Corbyn, there is some hope that the structure of corruption changes somewhat, but not completely. As I've said before, socialism and capitalism are mutually dependent. Endless liberalism is not desirable either, since it simply leads to people being confused into agreeing to yet another package of corruption. So, in addition to my entreaties to move your money, to stop supporting large lobbyists, to encourage competition from smaller and more honest players, I now ask you to consider investigating ecological, therefore money-saving ways of reducing your personal reliance on fossil fuels. You support war and corruption to a degree beyond that of even the most hardened junkie. There are many reasonably priced alternatives: solar, wind, ground source heat pumps, air-to-water heat pumps. The government would have you believe that this does not matter, despite European emissions targets. Remember the day Gordon Brown signed us up to them, simultaneously ordering 2 more coal-fired power stations? That's the level of stupidity and corruption we the public are up against. You need to change your habits now. Repeat after me: we are not American, and we will not be conned anymore.